known you for about 100 years, and I've never known your schedule not to be 2 or 3 men's worth of schedule in one day. So we won't waste much time. But I do have to begin with one framing question. The kingdom is undergoing some extraordinary changes. How is this changing diplomacy? What is happening in the kingdom that touches your world, and how the mechanics and machinery of diplomacy work?
Yes, we are embarking on a huge reform program under the Vision 2030 that is driven by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. The idea is to open up new areas of investment in Saudi Arabia, expand beyond oil, reduce our reliance on oil, empower women, empower youth, instill a culture of innovation and moderation, and attract foreign investment, make the government more efficient in order to create a stronger, more efficient society. We want our young, 70% of our population is under the age of 30. Our young people are very well connected in the world. They have hopes, they have dreams, they have ambitions. It is our role to create the environment for them to be able to achieve their hopes and goals and ambitions, and in the process make us a wealthier and stronger country that can withstand much more easily the storms that are raging around us. Our focus is domestic. Our focus is to improve the lot of our people. Our focus is to try to settle conflicts in the region so that we can live in a more secure environment, compared to the Iranian approach, which is death and destruction, trying to destroy Lebanon, destroy Syria, destroy Iraq, trying to destroy Bahrain, trying to cause mischief in Saudi Arabia, trying to destroy Yemen, dealing with terrorists, dealing with setting up militias that wreak havoc on the countries in which they operate, providing ballistic missiles to terrorist groups, encouraging the assassination of diplomats, the seizure of embassies, encouraging the disruptions of the Hajj, assassinating people in Europe, assassinating places of worship. Other than that, it's a great country.
So I've been coming to the kingdom for many years, and just one small note. When I recall some years ago when I met the now Crown Prince, I noted that I had first come to the kingdom before he was born, and he then replied that 70% of the kingdom is younger than he is. So it's both a commentary on the demographics of the kingdom and how I'm getting really old. So it was good to be there for that. Adel, I'd like to take this into a direction on maybe current events. The kingdom has just been struck in a way that touches the economies of the world.
Correct.
The countries such as Bangladesh, countries in Europe, countries in Africa paid more for energy. Turbulence was introduced
here in New York City.
New York City.
Yes.
Economies around the world were touched in a very direct way. Countries had less money to put into their health services because they were paying for energy from producers around the world. Why has it been so difficult for this attack to be seen, or why is it necessary to remind the world so often that this was an attack on the world itself and not just on Saudi Arabia? And are you having success, or are you seeing success in the narrative that this was indeed an attack on the world?
I believe so. I believe we see it in the more robust position of the E3 countries in Europe. The UK, France, and Germany came out with a very strong statement on Monday afternoon where they held Iran responsible for this attack and are looking at ways to make sure that Iran is not only held accountable, but there are options in dealing with Iran. We have a team in Saudi Arabia that's investigating the attack. We're certain that the equipment used are Iranian-made, as we are certain that the 260 ballistic missiles launched at Saudi Arabia from Yemen are Iranian manufactured and Iranian supplied, so there's no question about that. That's why we hold Iran responsible. We know that the attack came from the north, not from the south, so it's impossible that the Houthis would have launched these missiles because they don't have the range. Now the question is pinpointing the exact location from which the launch took place, and then assigning blame, and then making sure.
So let me just pull the thread on that. You now have one more warehouse in Riyadh. Perhaps, if we're fortunate to be able to move some of that equipment to the United States, for one more warehouse in the United States that shows one more warehouse full of Iranian equipment. The kingdom has been attacked by hundreds of missiles and drones, which are Iranian-made. These are not available for export. These are not available to be sold off the boot of a car. These must come from the government with a lot of training and support and parts. But the world's response has not been against Iran, despite a vast amount of evidence. And respectfully, and I noted this with an earlier speaker, in my previous job, my first priority was the protection of American lives. The missiles that fly into Saudi Arabia do not turn left and right over the heads of Americans.
Correct, 80,000.
Correct, 80,000. So Saudi Arabia is now responsible for the protection of 80,000 Americans against Iranian threats which occur on almost a daily basis. And I praise you and your military for an extraordinary job thus far. Why is it so hard for the world to see that there are Frenchmen at risk, there are Japanese at risk, Chinese at risk in Saudi Arabia, just as there are Saudis or Emiratis?
I think it's appeasement. I think it's not wanting to look at the reality that's looking us in the face. The Iranian Revolution in 1979, headed by Khomeini, disrupted the Middle East. It unleashed sectarian divisions in the Middle East. The Iranian Revolution sought to expand into the Middle East. It sought to topple governments in the Middle East. It sought to take control of all the Shia in the Middle East. And it's the Constitution, in the Constitution is enshrined the principle of exporting the revolution and the fact that Iran is in charge of the dispossessed, as they call them, which is the Shia. And so this would be like Italy saying every Catholic belongs to us. That's ridiculous. Right. Iran does not believe in the sovereignty of nations. Iran does not believe in the principle of non-interference in the affairs of other countries. Iran does not respect international laws. Iran is an outlaw state. Yet people don't want to see it this way because they're thinking we can have trade opportunities. They're thinking maybe if we're nice to them, they'll be nice to us. Okay, let's take a look at Iran's record of people trying to be nice to them. U.S. Embassy bombed in Beirut in the early 80s. Marines bombed at Beirut International Airport. Diplomats in Beirut kidnapped and murdered. Synagogue blown up in Argentina. The Khobar Towers in 1996 in Saudi Arabia. The assassination of Saudi diplomats in Thailand and in other places. The assassination campaign that they conducted in Europe. The bombing of the Rebel discotheque in Berlin. I mean, these are not things that happen out of the blue.
American detainees such as Robert Levinson.
Correct.
And a variety of others who still remain unaccounted for.
And then you look at Iran's record afterwards, and the decision to blow up the 3 compounds in Saudi Arabia in 2003 were made by Saif al-Adel, the chief of operations for Al-Qaeda, while he was in Iran. And we have the phone call on record. And yet people refuse to see this. The Iranians harbored and sheltered Al-Qaeda leaders for many, many years. Some of them are still there. At one point, even Osama bin Laden's son, and nobody holds them to account.
Well, actually, if I can pull that thread, it's a little worse than that. Because when I look in the war on terror, and obviously I had some very small role to play in that, Iran allowed a number of members of Al-Qaeda to transit their country. This is public information. Stopped them, briefly identified them, and said, go home. Had Iran stopped them and contacted the embassies of their countries to simply say, several thousand Al-Qaeda operatives are coming home from the Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan, the war on terror would have taken a dramatically different direction. Billions to track these people, to prevent lives, people who died, literally would have been prevented. When I look in the war on terror, the most important event I see that took thousands of operatives around the world, I actually see that Iranian decision, and Iran has escaped much international notice for this.
But the other thing that Iran did is not only provided safe haven for Al-Qaeda, but they also were in cahoots with Daesh. They attacked in Syria, they were fighting the moderate opposition, and they were dealing with Daesh, ISIS. It is not a surprise that Iran is the only region the only country in the region that has not been attacked by either Al-Qaeda or ISIS. There's a reason for this. We know from the documents that were captured in Osama bin Laden's house in Abbottabad, every other sentence he says, coordinate with the Iranians, check with the Iranians, make sure the Iranians are on board. So Iran it's for that reason that Iran is the chief sponsor of terrorism.
All right, so we've got historical review of facts relating to Iran. The Abqaiq Kharais attacks were an attack that touched the world. What needs to be done to stop this from happening tomorrow? And I'm going to push you in a little uncomfortable spot here, because I know you are a diplomat. You are one of the most articulate and polite individuals. I've seen you in some very tough areas where someone would have lost their temper, and you respond with usually a skewering, wonderful statement. But a diplomatic démarche is not what's needed, and a statement from the EU3 is not going to stop the Quds force. So what exactly is needed to be done? Because the next attack, if you look at the videos of the missiles coming into, I think it's Abqaiq, you actually can see trucks, drivers driving just before. For the life of me, I can't figure out how people, thank God, didn't die in that attack. So if this happens again, just from my vantage point, Americans may die. How do we prevent Americans from dying tomorrow in an Iranian attack, as well as Saudis, Finns, Frenchmen, Venezuelans, whoever it might be, who are living in the kingdom or in other places in the region? What needs to be done specifically?
Yeah. We have said that once the investigation is concluded and we have the proof, that there are a series of options that we will consider, and we will make the right decisions that include diplomatic options, that include economic options, and that include military options. We are in close consultations with the US and our other allies. This cannot go unanswered. And there has to be consequences to Iran for what it did. You cannot attack the world and take out 5% or 6% of the world's oil supply and get away with it. They have gotten away with murder for 40 years. It's time to stop them now. And we believe... And we believe that trying to set up a parallel SWIFT system to make payments for Iranian goods is appeasement. It hasn't worked in the past, will not work in the future. We believe that offering them loans so they can come back to the negotiating table is appeasement and will not work. The world has to take a very firm position to say to Iran, enough is enough, this is not going to happen. You're either a revolution, in which case we cannot deal with you, or you're a nation state, in which case you will abide by international law and the rules of the international system. And the options that we're looking at are numerous. And of course, I'm not going to get into them in a public forum. Of course. Yeah, but the Iranians have to understand that their policy has to change. We don't have any problem with the Iranian people. We respect Iran's culture. We respect Iran as a great nation. But we have a problem with this regime. A regime that seeks to destroy us and destroy the region. A regime that is single-handedly responsible for every problem in our area. Must be made to change. For the sake of Iran, the nuclear deal the JCPOA was made, and people say it's great because it stops Iran from going nuclear. That's nonsense. It's a weak deal. The sunset provision allows Iran to enrich as much as it wants 12 years after the agreement is made. The inspections regime is weak because it doesn't deal with undeclared sites. Every time we catch Iran engaging in monkey business on the nuclear program, it's in secret sites. So that has to be changed. And the nuclear deal does not deal with the two other elements that are part of the problem called Iran, which is the missile program and Iran's support for terrorism and interference in the affairs of other countries. So we need to have a comprehensive package that makes sure that Iran comports itself as nation states do, and that Iran lives according to international law and acts like a nation state. Then it can become part of the community of nations. But I don't see that happening with the mindset that exists right now among the Iranians. Instead, what we've seen after the JCPOA, they doubled down in Syria, they doubled down in Yemen. I personally have not seen one economic development project launched in Yemen as a result of the money that Iran got from the JCPOA. And frankly, to think that within 12 years, Iran will go from being an ideological revisionist state to a liberal democracy is wishful thinking. In fact, it's gotten in the other direction. And now that the Trump administration pulled out of the JCPOA, and we were the first country to support them, we think it's the right thing to do. The Iranians have to understand that they need to come back and deal with the international community on the whole host of issues. And
there must be a consequence for actions. And you were modest, but I have to mention that in your litany, which was quite long,
I gave you the
crimes,
executive version.
You missed the Iranian attempt to kill a certain ambassador in Washington.
I don't take it personally.
And we want to thank God for your safety.
Thank you.
But I do highlight that for a second reason, because I think the United Nations itself has failed to take robust actions against Iran, to include at that time, where you have a critically important ambassador in the United States Capitol after 9/11 with an attack that is captured on telephone recordings. And this is all on the website of the Southern District of New York. The entire case is there, so the evidence is really quite extraordinarily deep. But the international community's silence, I believe, has encouraged Iran. So let's shift gears again, since your time is limited. All right, so we need to avoid appeasement. Iran needs to pay a price for its actions. We need to protect people tomorrow. What do we do to push Iran back in the region? And I ask this because if you decide that Iran can't be pushed back easily, aren't we saying that we're putting the Houthis, the Iraqis, the Yemenis, the Iraqis, Syrians, and Lebanese under an Iranian domination for several generations, just as people in Eastern Europe were placed under Soviet domination for a couple of several generations? And it's easy for us to say, well, we didn't go to war, but we don't have to have our children grow up in a Hezbollah household, such as Kataib Hezbollah, yes, Lebanese Hezbollah, etc. What should the international community be doing to push Iran back in the region?
Very simple. Go after Iran wherever it operates. In West Africa, where it engages in money laundering. In South and Central America, where it's in cahoots with the drug cartels via Hezbollah. In Lebanon, to curtail Hezbollah's activities and free Lebanon from Hezbollah's grip. In Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. We need to work on those issues. We need to make sure that the Iranians stop smuggling weapons into the Gulf countries like Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Yemen. The irony of it is the Iranians are saying they want to have a dialogue with us, and then they turn around and establish the largest terrorist cell in history, weapons, the Arabiya cell in Kuwait.
Right.
While they're talking to the Kuwaitis about wanting to talk to the GCC. So you're telling me you want to have conversations with me while you're trying to blow me up? What kind of policy is this? And so we have in Iran two faces. We have one face that talks about dialogue but can't deliver, and we have another face that can deliver but wants to kill you. So who do we talk to? And
I would suggest not the second.
Yeah, well, so
unless you have a lot of friends near you at the time.
The first can't deliver. For example, the ship that the British stopped in Gibraltar that was supposed to take oil to Iran. The foreign minister of Iran assured the British that the ship would not go to Syria. The ship went to Syria. So we have two situations. Either the foreign minister is disingenuous to be diplomatic, which is bad, or the foreign minister is not aware of who calls the shots in his country, which is worse.
Or both are right.
Or both. So I'm saying this because what they say doesn't, what did they say in the 60s, jive? The president of Iran talks about an arrangement in the Gulf. Well, if you want security in the Gulf, stop your activities of aggression in the Gulf. It's like saying, we, the countries of the region, need to take care of our security and we need everybody to leave the region. That's ridiculous. The reason the foreign forces are in the region is because of Iran's aggressive behavior. And so they want us to reduce our defenses so they can just march into our countries. I mean, it's great if you can achieve it, but it's not going to happen.
So, Minister, I know our time is limited. I would like to close, but again, with one more difficult issue, Yemen.
Yes.
Now, Yemen is it's historically tied to your country. You have many Saudis of Yemeni origin. It's much as we have Mexican Americans or Latino Americans, Hispanic Americans in the United States. It's a historic trend. It's also located on one of the most strategic waterways on the planet. In many ways, more strategic than the Strait of Hormuz, because so much of the world's food goes through the Red Sea economic basin. And it's the Yemen border is about, 400 miles from Mecca? So the idea that you would allow Iran to establish a missile array in Yemen, similar to what they have done in Lebanon against Israel, to threaten a major world artery, et cetera, is something that I think no one can accept. And I'm not here to either push you for a peaceful solution to the Yemeni problem, because I know that's what you seek. And I'm not here to have you tell me how much aid the Saudis and the Emiratis have poured. I think it's like $65 billion that you've put into the Yemen.
14.5 since the conflict began.
14.5, but the broader region, it's a massive number. But what is needed to stop Iran from involvement in Yemen? Because foreign civil wars usually end when you have an instigating power withdrawn or defeated. But the fact that Iranian missiles are raining down on, again, Americans, as well as Saudis and others in Saudi territory, and we're grateful for your protection there, what will stop Iran from its involvement in Yemen?
More robust action by the international community, rather than criticize the coalition for trying to ensure that Yemen does not fall under the grip of Iran. The international community should be supporting Saudi Arabia and the coalition. If we were not doing this, then the Iranians would be in charge of Yemen. And imagine if we had a crisis like the one we had with the tankers and the one we had with Abqaiq, and Iran is in charge of both the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb.
Well, actually, the Abqaiq attack, as terrible as it was and unprecedented in large size, is not the first time the Iranians, through surrogates, have attempted to attack oil platforms in Saudi Arabia. In the Red Sea area, they have routinely attempted to do this, but it has been frustrated because of the effectiveness of coalition military. So in essence, my point being that we could have faced a problem similar to, perhaps not on the same scale as Abqaiq, for a couple of years. And so again, tomorrow this could happen again in the Red Sea with just some bad luck because of a Houthi explosive boat or a missile or some other Iranian technology that's there. Am I right?
Yes, and I think if it were not for the professionalism of Aramco, our national oil company, which is absolutely world-class. There is no company in the world like it. If it weren't for their professionalism and their superior design and engineering and construction and the redundancies in their systems and their ability to deal with an emergency, the shutdown could have lasted much longer.
And your strategic oil reserve.
And we would have a shortage of oil, and you could see oil at $150 a barrel. Now, what you have is, when you look at other situations like this, a well explodes. It takes months to plug it. You have a spill in Alaska. It took weeks, if not months, to deal with it. What Aramco did in this crisis is nothing short of spectacular. And I don't want people to think that because Aramco was able to shut down the fires in one case in 6 hours and in Khurais in 4 hours, and because they were able within 48 hours to gradually begin production, and because they had redundancies and they had a strategic reserve in place, the impact on the global markets was minimum. We shouldn't be complacent about this. They did a tremendous job which averted a potential economic calamity. And so I don't want people to think that because they were able to do this, that the world was not in danger.
So I need to just pull a thread on that as well. When we talk about the economic pain of an attack such as this, usually it's described in terms of something happens at the gas pump. But it's actually, this is what happens to countries' GDP. This raises unemployment. So you will have unemployment go up in Ohio because of an oil crisis of this nature somewhere else in the world.
Yes.
So this has a direct impact on the lives of average Americans and average Europeans and average Asians and average Africans. It's around the world, and that's why I believe the prevention of this. So, Minister, your time, I've gone over the amount of time we were allotted.
Can I make one point
Please.
about on oil? I think there's an argument that says, why should we be involved in the Gulf since we're a net oil exporter? Which is a very incorrect argument, because oil is fungible. And even if you're an oil exporter, if there is a shortage of oil in Asia, it's going to drive global prices up, which means prices at the pump in America go up with it.
We just saw that theory happen here because of Abqaiq.
So nobody is immune. It's all,
Correct.
It's what happens to the oil market in one area affects the oil market in every area. And so the quote-unquote dependence on oil in the Gulf still exists, even though physically you may not be dependent on it, but you're dependent on stability in the Gulf, on security in the Gulf, and that's why it's important to deter Iran, push back against Iran, and work very hard in order to get Iran to change its policies and adopt a new approach. But I don't see how this will happen with this regime. We always say we don't want regime change. We don't care about what system of government the Iranians want for themselves. That's their business. But what we do care about is what policies an Iranian government pursues. If it's death and destruction, then we do care about pushing back. If it's peace and cooperation, then most welcome. So far, since the revolution, we have only seen death and destruction. And it's important that the world wake up. It's important that the world take a firm stand against Iran, and it's important that the world say to Iran, enough is enough. And appeasement, I say once again, has not worked and will not work.
Excellency, nobody could say it better. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Tom, any final remarks?